Time being 9 o'clock, I want to call to order the subcommittee on housing. And let's start with Senate Bill 86. Senator Reardon, I have an amendment from you. Would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to speak to it, and this amendment addresses two concerns of people far smarter than I. The first was a concern of the state treasurer to cap the guarantee liability that is on here, that it couldn't be unending. And the second is a request of New Hampshire Housing to change the cap of 100,000 to 100,000. That would not get us out the door. 100 million to 300 million. And just by way of explanation, at New Hampshire Housing, and that's capping the liability too. The existing debt that New Hampshire Housing has liability for right now is 460 million, and the guarantee is half state and half federal. On their balance sheet, that only shows up as a $10 million liability. So what will show up here, even that's at 460 million, at 300 million will show up as far less on the balance sheet for the state of New Hampshire. And New Hampshire Housing also noted that they have 0% losses. They've never had to access that guarantee before, historically.
My recollection, and I'm sorry if maybe you just addressed this, my recollection was that the state treasurer had a concern.
And that was that the guarantee wasn't capped.
That
the
was the cap.
liability wasn't capped, correct.
I understand. So it's a dramatic expansion of 100 million to 300 million of potential liability.
Right.
I just want to, that's necessary?
New Hampshire Housing had thought it was necessary, and I think we commented at the time that we heard this bill that 100 million doesn't go far, even using as an example the resident-owned communities that the Community Loan Fund does. That may be only 2 communities that year with the price of that kind of property these days. So they thought 300 million, and again, they rationalized that on the balance sheet liability would be less than 10 million if in fact the 460 million they currently have out only shows up as 10 million on their balance sheet. So this is probably more like 7 million on their balance sheet.
Thank you, Senator Reardon. At this point, I want to, given that it's an amendment that's under discussion, I want to give the people that are here a chance to give any feedback that they may have. Does anyone wish to speak to this amendment or the underlying bill? Okay. I can support the amendment.
Thank you.
So I'll move, why don't you move all to pass on the amendment?
I move ought to pass on amendment 2025-0515S.
And I will second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Obviously, no one's opposed. And I'll move all to pass on the underlying bill as amended. Senate Bill 86.
Second.
All in favor, aye. Aye. Okay, so we recommend all to pass on Senate Bill 86 as amended by 0515S. I'm sorry? Thank you. Abby's going to be here for commerce in 27 minutes. I hope everything's okay. All right. Okay. Thanks for the information. All right, let's look at Senate Bill 279. Senator Reardon, I don't know if you're a co-sponsor. You are a co-sponsor on this. Is there anything you'd like to say about the bill?
I do not believe there is anything beyond what the testimony was at the public hearing. The Housing Champions Fund has been wildly successful, and it's the opportunity to build off of that.
Senator, do you recall if this is an increase of appropriations over the prior biennium?
It's not. This is it. Yeah. I actually have in my notes the concern that the 1 million is a small amount. The demand right now is 150 to 100 million.
This may be the wrong year for
Yep.
to add zeros.
Yeah, and then my other note is we could view this as a pilot and do a survey of need in going forward to figure out what that number should be.
Right. So with bills like this, I generally sort of have you heard me say it last time. I don't usually support subsidies. I think that people should do the job that they do because they make money at it. And we shouldn't twist the free market by pinching it here and squeezing it there and hope to get the outcome that we really, really want. We shouldn't have to bribe developers to build and bribe cities to provide opportunity. Having said that, this is something I can live with. I think it's been, certainly hasn't been harmful in the past 2 years. My own city of Manchester benefited from it. It's been designated as a housing champion community. So I can support the bill as written.
I agree. I think in a good market where things are being built, this is probably an extra, but in this market, until we find out what the level playing field is that actually allows housing to happen, this is a great idea.
Okay. So I can move that we recommend Senate Bill 279 ought to pass.
Second?
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Okay, no one's opposed. Just so we can touch base one more time on Senate Bill 86, something else just occurred to me.
Yep.
I did want to speak to Senator Innes about possibly a sunset on that at some number of years down the road, and that way we could look at it, evaluate it, and decide if it was something that was successful, we keep going with it, and so on. So just I wanted to get that out there as something we
Absolutely.
talked about.
And I'd recommend 5 years if we're looking.
5 years. I can live with that. Okay. All right, those are the only two bills that we had on the calendar discussed today that I'm aware of. I did just get a long list today of other bills that have been referred to the committee, so we can talk about that at some point down the road. These bills haven't even had the hearing yet.
Okay,
And with that, a motion to adjourn,
so moved.
and second, and we're adjourned.
Aye.
Thank you.
We should rule the world. Right. Okay, that sounded like a phone.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Senate Commerce. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Senator Reardon, would you start us? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We're going to start the day off with Senate Bill 170. Welcome, Senator Perkins Quokka. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Senator. You guys have two of the oddest chairs in this committee.
I know. Two other people could sit with you in that.
Yes, I need company. Thank you, Senator Ricciardi. So I am here to introduce SB 170. For the record, I'm Senator Rebecca Perkins Quokka, representing District 21, which is comprised of Portsmouth and the surrounding towns. SB 170 is an attempt to standardize assessing for multifamily buildings, especially for the stock of buildings that we have now across the state that are currently under covenants for affordability as they come out of their long-term covenants and are going to go back into their covenants. Providing certainty on the assessment is something that can really help with just financing and investment and making sure that we can keep that housing stock on the market. However, my colleague to your left has a very similar bill that is being heard right after mine. They have very similar text. And so I'm actually here to ask you to just hang on to my bill. Maybe we can come up with something else housing related to amend it with. But in lieu of supporting my bill, I actually would ask you to support Senator Murphy's bill, SB 173, that you're hearing next.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yep.
I assume there's no questions then. Thank you for your testimony.
All right. Thank you, Senator.
The chair will now call Matt Manning. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Given testimony just a few seconds ago.
Could you just,
Oh, I'm sorry.
for the record, introduce yourself? Thanks.
Yes, I'm Matt. Thanks. Matt Menning with Elm Grove Companies out of Hooksett, New Hampshire. We are a owner, developer, and we have a portfolio of about 700 units of affordable workforce housing in the state. And given the testimony just a moment ago, I'm prepared to speak on either of the bills, but do you want to move to the next one, or would you like me to testify on Senator Murphy's bill now?
I think you'd have to wait to testify to that when we hear the bill.
I would be happy to do that if it pleases the senators
Okay.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll still go down the list and let people decide what they want to do, but I have Scott Bartlett. Welcome, Scott.
Hello. Hi, my name is Scott Bartlett. I'm the assessor of the town of Goffstown. I will withhold my testimony as well for 173. The bills are very similar. I did work with the ASB committee on this particular bill, or these two particular bills. We do prefer Senate Bill 173 over this one. There are some minor flaws in this one. They are extremely similar, but there's a couple minor flaws. I do believe the wording in 173 is better, so I will withhold further testimony for that bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will now call Matt Mayberry.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Would anyone else from the public like to speak on Senate Bill 170? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on 170. Let me see what time it is.
8 minutes.
Okay, we'll be in recess for 8 minutes. 3 minutes. Everybody wants to speak. That sounds like kids. School. Oh, maybe. I thought I saw a school bus.
Yeah, it could be. Caucus at 9. Session. A lot of time.
Even if he hadn't announced about executive, I still wouldn't do it with just a few of us here.
Oh.
Yeah, but he
Unless
announced.
he wanted to.
Yeah, he said he didn't want to do anything but wait till, it'll be a big day on the, is it the 4th? I think it's the 4th. Yeah.
We have,
It'll give us time to like go over them and make sure we know what we want.
your mic's on.
We're gonna start. We will now open the hearing on Senate Bill 173. Senator Murphy, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Murphy, representing the people of District 16. Senate Bill 173 seeks to clarify an existing ambiguity in the application of the low-income housing tax credit program. Different municipalities across the state are interpreting the existing statute in different ways, and this seeks to clear that up. To say it was a rare honor to have my legislation endorsed by others behind me, and I appreciate that very much. I can answer any questions, but you obviously have people here to speak to actual examples of this happening, and I suggested their testimony be more useful than mine.
Okay, thank you, Senator Murphy.
Thank you.
The chair will now call again Matt Manning.
Good morning again. Thank you for having me. My name is Matt Menning from Elm Grove Companies. We are a developer, owner, and manager of multifamily apartments, primarily in New Hampshire. And as I said, we have about 700 workforce or low-income housing tax credit units that we manage, or in the process of developing another 110 roughly. I am here today. Thank you, Senator Murphy, for putting this bill through. So currently the RSA 75-1A is for workforce properties with a low income and rent restriction recorded on the deed. And the current bill, or the current RSA, I should say, property taxes are the greater of 10% of your actual income, or a more complicated formula to do an income capitalization approach. And my understanding reading the bill text is that this simplifies the bill and just makes it 10% of your actual income on the property is what your tax bill would be. I'm in favor of this bill because it is a very difficult administrative process to go through for owners, for tax assessors, and I would assume as well for New Hampshire Housing. A quick run through of what that process looks like. You have to perform audits with your CPAs. Then you fill out a form. I brought a few copies of an example if you'd like me to leave them behind. It's several pages with lots of Excel input. It is very error prone, and some of the data can be subjective or hard to find. You're talking about cap rates, vacancy rates, the equalization ratios for towns and cities, which are not always published in clear places. If you fill all that out, it takes a few hours for each one to review and fill out. Then you submit it to the assessor. They have to review everything. Sometimes there are questions or differences of interpretation, which can cause issues. So you have a back and forth process potentially, try to resolve those questions or issues. And then finally, by May, you will know what your tax bill is likely to be for that year. Under this bill, Senate Bill 173, it's very simple. It's 10% of what you collected in income for the prior year, which we support that to make it more simple from an administrative process and easier to budget what your expenses are likely to be, which for these workforce properties, they don't have a lot of extra income, and knowing what your budget's going to be is very helpful to operate with stability. As I understand it, the Assessing Standards Board had already recommended and agreed that this approach is a good one. I'm sure they'll testify as to the exact language here, but I believe there's been meetings over the last year to get their heads wrapped around this and to make that change. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I can pass out the example form, but that is what I have to say in support of this bill.
Okay, are there any questions for members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Would you like me to?
Yes, I would,
Okay.
please. Oh, would you mind just giving it to him? Thanks. The chair will now call Scott Bartlett. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Scott Bartlett. I'm the assessor of the town of Goffstown. I have been involved with the Assessing Standards Board on the subcommittee in regards to this bill as well, as many other commissions and subcommittees regarding assessing. I am in support of the bill as it is written. I would have one minor suggestion to a change. It's in the analysis, not in the meat of the bill. On the second line of the analysis, it says housing tax credit program shall be assessed. We are not establishing an assessment here. We are establishing the tax. So that word should be changed to taxed. Other than that, I do not have any recommendations to change that. I do have some written testimony. I'm not going to go into detail of that. I will hand that out at the end of my testimony here. One of the major concerns that assessors had was the original verbiage of this bill said net income instead of actual, and that would have been a huge change to what we are currently doing. Right now, we have two different options. One is a formula which can be very unpredictable. The other is 10% of the actual income. I have right now in the town of Goffstown, we have one apartment complex that is eligible for this program. We've been assessing that, or I'm sorry, we've been taxing that on the 10% of the actual income for at least the last 7 years. The formula has not worked, and I have no issue with removing that formula from statute. If we had gone to net income, it would have had a huge change, a difference of almost 300% in taxes collected. As long as we stay with the word actual, I do support this bill. As I said, I'm open to any questions, and I will pass out my testimony when I'm done.
Thank you. Members of the committee have any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We will now call Robert.
Good morning. My name is Robert Turney, and I'm the Executive Director of NIBWorks Southern New Hampshire, the owner of that property in Goffstown that the prior speaker
Good morning.
just mentioned. So thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. I've handed out a letter in support of SB 173, as well as a compilation background of how we got here. I don't want to say that I'm to blame for the formula that we have now, but I instigated the original original statute because NeighborWorks has been in the affordable housing business for over 30 years. We have dozens of properties around Southern New Hampshire. And prior to 2007, we saw very inconsistent methodologies from municipality to municipality on how these properties were assessed and thus taxed. So the current RSA is a result of a bill that was passed in 2007 to come up with a, yes, very complex formula that I wish was simpler at the time, but it was the best tool that we could develop at that time based on the information that we had. I think there was a concern in the assessing and the municipality community that the properties needed to pay their fair share, and that the methodology, a different methodology, would result in them not paying their fair share. So, as someone that pays over $750,000 a year in real estate taxes, I am in full support of 173 because it will, I believe, provide the original objective of providing consistency and fairness to the taxation of properties developed using the low-income housing tax credit program. So anyway, I provided you with a lot of written information, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
We'll now hear from Matt Mayberry. Good morning, good to see you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's a great day here in New Hampshire. My name is Matt Mayberry. I'm the CEO of the New Hampshire Home Builders Association. We represent the 27,000 men and women who work in the residential building trades, and thank you for your time today. We're in full support of SB 173 because this is an example of exactly how New Hampshire should work. Matt Menning, who you heard from at Elm Grove, who also happens to be my boss and is president of the board of directors for the Home Builders Association, he discovered a problem in that calculation of how the formula was done. And he contacted Senator Murphy, and they met, and they came forward with this. And Senator Murphy, thank you for doing this. This is great constituent service and exactly the way New Hampshire should work. But we're in support of this for the simple reason that it unwinds that Gordian knot of red tape. It streamlines the process, makes it clear, transparent, and easy for anyone to understand. And so please support this. Senator Murphy, thank you for doing this. Madam Chair, thank you for your time today, and I can answer any questions.
Any questions for members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
We will now hear from Betsy Patton. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the members of the committee, I'm Betsy Patton. I am the chairman of the Assessing Standards Board that everybody's talking about back there. And on January 29th, we voted in full support of Senate Bill 173 to make the process simple and also to allow to have the taxes predictable. We have worked on this for quite a while, and it looks like this is a good tweak to the RSA so that it will be easier for everyone to be able to have the low-income housing tax credit. So thank you very much for the time that you have given me, and I can't answer any math problem issues, but I do know that we are in support, and I hope that you would pass this out as ought to pass when you go to the Senate floor. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now call Nick Taylor. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Nick Taylor, the Director of Housing Action New Hampshire. We're a statewide advocacy organization that supports pro-housing policies. Our members include developers, landlords, lenders, property managers, homeless service providers, and more. we're here in full support of Senate Bill 173, and thanks Senator Murphy for bringing it forward. Echo a lot of the points that have been made, but broadly speaking, the low-income housing tax credit program is a huge driver of below market rate housing. It's very difficult to build below market rate housing. The tax credit really supports that. It makes those possible. The predictability is enormous in market rate housing. Developers have the opportunity to price that cost into rent increases or other funding opportunities for affordable housing. That flexibility does not exist. And so this predictability is huge. These are also, as folks may know, with the low-income housing tax credit program, long-term developments, long-term agreements. We're talking 30, 45, 60 years for 9% projects. And so this isn't something that a project is going to come in and out of. It is a long-term agreement, and makes sense to assess it differently. So thank you for your service, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We will now call Jack from New Hampshire Housing.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jack Ruderman. I am the Legislative Affairs Advisor for New Hampshire Housing. Our interest in this bill stems from our role overseeing the more than 400 affordable renting housing developments that have been financed using the federal low-income housing tax credit, which I'm going to abbreviate to LIHTC, is sort of how it's referred to in the industry. And those properties are subject, of course, to affordability restrictions. We don't own or manage these properties. We allocate the tax credits to developers around the state, which allows them to attract investments that pay for the construction of the apartments. After they are built, our asset management group visits each one of them every 1 to 3 years to make sure they're being operated in keeping with their affordability covenants, and also making sure they are well maintained and managed so people can be proud to call them home. LIHTC properties have a unique challenge. They commit for decades to rent apartments to people with a certain income range at rents they can afford. That means that the income of the property is tied to the median income of the families and households that live there. But the cost of running a LIHTC property goes up, just like everything else, because a LIHTC apartment building runs just like any other apartment building. Indeed, it works a lot like a market rate apartment building. Critically, LIHTC apartment buildings do not receive operating funds from the government. The owner collects rent that pays for utilities, maintenance, taxes, insurance, and everything else using those rent receipts. This presents a real challenge when costs rise faster than people's incomes. Unlike market rate landlords, LIHTC owners cannot raise rents to cover those costs. And those conditions have presented some real challenges for LIHTC properties as costs have risen more than they have been able to offset with rent over the past several years. This was all true when the legislature passed the current law, which established for the first time a method for calculating property taxes that accounted for the property's affordability restrictions. Obviously, a very welcome development. This bill now proposes modest and straightforward changes to that law, which will make it easier to implement and provide more predictability for the property owners across the state who are providing essential housing for our seniors, veterans, workforce, and so many others. For these reasons, New Hampshire Housing supports this bill, and I thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Reardon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack, this may not be a question for you, but for somebody else. So do you have properties that are currently calculating their tax liability differently, not using the income approach, that are in the middle of their 10-year plan of doing that?
Well, the statute as it exists now, 75A1, allows for 2 different methodologies. And
Exactly.
yes, I'm sure that we have some properties that go with option A and some that go with option B.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on Senate Bill 173? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing. Okay. Before we open the next hearing, to be respectful of all of your time, I do want to mention we are not going to go into executive session today, but we will be having a big executive session on March 4th after the Senate break. And now we will open Senate Bill 282. Oh, I'm sorry. Wow, thanks.
Madam Chair.
Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. My name is Senator Keith Murphy, representing the people of District 16. In an earlier bill, a few weeks ago, I talked about some bills I had coming forward that were tweaks to try to begin to address the housing issues that we have. This bill is one of those tweaks. There has been a national movement to lessen the requirement to have 2 stairways in a multi-unit building. Some cities and states are now doing it in buildings 6 stories and under, and this would take us in that direction. Stairways are expensive to add to a building, and they remove valuable living space. So going from 2 stairways to 1 stairway brings down the cost, the per unit cost, quite considerably. The bill was signed off pending redraft. As you know, we had some issues with LLS, but we do have an amendment that I believe has been distributed, and the amendment addresses some concerns that were brought forward by the state fire marshal. He is here to speak to the bill. I'm not going to say that he loves the bill. He'll speak for it himself, but I attempted to address all of his concerns with that amendment. The buildings must be sprinkled in order to qualify for 1 stairway. There's square footage requirements. Even things such as electrical receptacles not being allowed in the exit stairways and such. All of those requirements and suggestions came from him. Again, this puts us sort of in the movement towards single stairway buildings and sprinkled structures, and would do a lot to bring down the cost of those buildings. And that concludes my testimony. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
We will call back up Nick Taylor. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm Scott.
Madam Chair, Commission, I know the state run our slots here, and I would like to speak first and say that you close a minute.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Sean Toomey, would you come forward, please? Nice to see you.
You as well. Good morning. Sean Toomey, State Fire Marshal for the record. I just want to thank Senator Murphy for the opportunity to kind of work collaboratively on coming up with this. The single stair issue has been a conversation over the last couple of years nationally. And I will say that in our current state fire code here in New Hampshire, a 4-story building is allowed. A 3-story building is permitted under our state building code. So there's definitely a need to align our state fire code and our state building code here in our state to provide some better access to 4-story buildings. So I just got the amendment this morning, so I haven't had a full opportunity to speak through it. Changes my approach just a little bit, but as Senator Murphy mentioned, I think the items shown on line 13 through 26 around a 4,000 square foot building in the exiting the sprinkler systems are all language that I provided to Senator Murphy, and that reflects efforts, a national consensus around 4-story, up to 4 stories on the building code. So this is language we'll see in the 2027 model building code. So I think we'll be an early adopter of some of that language. I guess the one concern that I share a little bit as we go look at a 5 and a 6-story building is, I think that's a very unique situation that, we need to think a little bit about the construction type of the building. Is it a, lightweight wood framing that I think we've all seen burns very rapidly now, versus a non-combustible building. I think we just got to figure out how to balance that a little bit. And then also I think, what are the capabilities of a fire department? And when I say that, I think of like the Manchester, Nashua's, Portsmouth's, communities that have a ladder truck versus just a ladder, right? So a 4-story building, you have a chance of getting at with a ladder from if we had to rescue, because if we have one exit out of the building, we for some reason lose that one exit, the other option is out a window, which just is the same as if our own homes, you'd be jumping out a window. But when you get up to that 5th and 6th story, our ground ladders aren't going to reach that 5th and 6th story. So I think we just got to think through that a little bit if we choose to be, I guess, on the forefront of going to 6 stories. It's happened across the country in certain departments, but it's focused, to certain communities. But there's an emphasis on the capabilities of the local fire departments when you go to that level. Our rural New Hampshire towns are going to struggle with a much taller building. We probably won't see those in those communities, but I think it's just something we need to think about. And lastly, the only thing I think about is you hear from us regularly is that code amendments we like to see in the codes. And one of the ideas last year in Senate Bill 373, where we did some work with the home builders on an energy issue in the homes about the air exchanges, the General Court directed us, the Board of Fire Control and the Building Code Review Board, tongue twister this morning, to amend that. So in effect, you told us to do this. Please do this. So we put this language, this amendment in the right spot in the codes. And in effect, you also ratified it, which you need to do. Any of our amendments in those two boards, you as a general court needs to ratify. So I think as we finalize this, which I think we're honing in much closer through the work that Senator Murphy has given me the opportunity to provide some input on, I think if we had the opportunity to say, hey, boards, please do this, I think that would be helpful for the end users. And when I say the end users, whether it's a home builder, a contractor, or a design professional, so that they know that the codes amendments at the state level are in our code amendment package that we developed and is available on our website. And so that would be the only input. But I just want to thank Senator Murphy again for the opportunity to kind of collaborate on this. I know this has been a big issue across the country, and it's actually a global issue as we address it. And I think a lot of what we hear globally more than in the States is that we're seeing much taller buildings, and especially in the European countries, but they're typically the non-combustible. So I think that's why those folks are more likely to go to the much taller buildings. So I think with a little bit more work, maybe, I know it would make me feel a lot happier, but just seeing this amendment is better than what we worked on yesterday. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Senator Murphy.
Mr. Toomey, it was great to work with you, and I appreciate your help and cooperation in framing this language. I think your input made a big difference for the bill. Could you just speak for a second about sprinkled buildings and how my understanding is that it's almost unheard of to have a fire fatality in a sprinkled building. Can you speak to me for a moment about how effective those are?
Sure, I can't speak to very specific numbers, but a properly sprinkled building that's operational is the risk is very low. Typically those fatalities are if you're sort of, I'm going to say, intimate to the fire, right? So that might be very different than someone else. I think the only time that the bigger issues that we see in a sprinkled building and there's a fire situation is if it's disabled or there's some issue with the system, and that's the same with some of the fire alarm systems, right? I think we're seeing a trend, unfortunately, in our state over the last few years that our fire fatalities are going up in the residential structures, but that trend also is reflective of that when we go to those, there's the smoke alarms are missing. And so, when the cisterns are in place and they're working the way they're supposed to, the losses are minimized. So that's accurate on the sprinkler system side. I don't have the numbers exactly off the top of my head today. Thank you.
Well, I have a question. So safety being the most important thing, and so your concern, even if it's sprinkled, is if the building is too tall and there may be some other reason, Many of our New Hampshire fire departments don't have the truck with the ladder that can reach. And so that's what you're concerned about, is that correct?
For the 5 and 6 story buildings, the 4-story buildings, if we didn't have the conflict today between our current state building, state fire code, we could build 4-story buildings that are sprinkled and have one exit. That's the only thing that's preventing that today is there's a conflict between our two codes, which needs to get cleaned up. We have not contemplated in the state yet a 5-story or a 6-story building. I think when we look at the 5 or 6-story buildings, I think it becomes more important to think about what you said, Senator Ricciardi, is that different fire departments are going to have different capabilities to rescue someone from a window in the event that a sprinkler system doesn't do its job and we lose that exit for some reason, right? Because the only option then is out the window. Does that make sense?
And it would be a really big cost to towns to have to invest in a different truck with the proper ladder. I imagine it would be very expensive. Having just got the amendment, I kind of glanced at it. One thing I don't see, and given the recent tragedies, is there's nothing that says you have to have a carbon monoxide detector. And we've had such horrific tragedies. Is there a reason that that's not something, or is it in there and I don't see it?
Yeah, no, I would suggest to you that this is very specific to the exiting and the specifics for that. The requirements for smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms are in the building and fire codes, and we're not talking about doing anything to change those. So I think the intent of this is really to try to get to a few more stories, one less exit in certain circumstances. So this is very isolated.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Oh, Senator Reardon.
Thank you. Sean, I just am thinking about a situation of a fire in Concord that was on a hill. I think a 3-story high-ceilinged building, but 3 tower ladders were used to fight that. And the topography of that site meant the ladder trucks on the back side of it were stretching 4 or 5 stories to get to the top of that. So I think I would just maybe want that as a nod to somebody who's looked at the topography too. Fighting the front of the building was fine, but in the event it was the back of the building, it was far higher just because of the topography of the land.
I would concur, I guess, as we go more than 5, we just figure out a way to language that whether there's a different level of approvals, because it's going to be site-specific, locality-specific. There's going to be some things that are, I keep coming back to 4 stories is allowed today on the fire code. So to that part of it, to me, is a no-brainer, even though my friends in the building department might not like it. But the building folks are at the 4 stories. So in a couple of years, we'll be sitting in front of you saying, hey, we're ready to adopt the 27 codes. It says we can do 4 stories. It may change by then, but I think cleaning up the 3-story versus 4-story is something we have to do, I think, today to help this issue.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And now we will call Scott. Jenny? Can't read writing, sorry.
It's okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Scott Tenney, representing the New Hampshire Building Officials Association Executive Board of Directors. Thank you for taking our testimonies out of order. I'm aware that Mr. Toomey had collaborated with Senator Murphy on this, and I understand that there was an amendment. I have not had the opportunity to see it and review it at all. So rather than rehash and repeat everything Mr. Toomey just said, thank you. I will reiterate his comments and share our concerns. The way the initial bill had come out, there were obviously some grave concerns with the safety aspect. Knowing that there is a proposed amendment to reduce the square footage, it helps lessen that. One of our other concerns and opposition to this is this bill and going through statutory law is contrary to an already established process for code amendments. By writing codes and legislation into statutory law, it creates a conflict for the end user, builders, contractors, residents, and even code officials such as myself. Primarily, we reference and refer to the actual state building codes themselves and the amendments there too, which are written and by the New Hampshire Building Code Review Board and become a part of the code. We would like to see this Senate bill move to the Building Code Review Board for their review and ultimately become an amendment to the building code as it stands, which would also help in cleaning up the difference between the fire code and building code that Mr. Toomey just previously testified to. Any amendment does have to be ratified by the state legislature, so it still goes through that full process. It is also my understanding that in an upcoming code cycle, there is already proposed language very similar to this Senate bill. My understanding is purported that it should be coming in the 2027 editions of the building codes. So if that comes to fruition, having this in state statute when it would also be in the building code could create additional conflicts. And other than that, I will stand off my soapbox.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your
Thank you very much.
testimony, Scott. We will call Nick Taylor.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, I'm Nick Taylor, the Director of Housing Action, New Hampshire. So we thank Senator Murphy for bringing this forward. We're here in support of the bill. As has been talked about, there's a growing popularity with this conversation around single-stair housing. And there are 17 states now, including New Hampshire, that have proposed legislation to either study this or bring it forward in their building code or allow municipalities to adopt it themselves. Some of these have already passed. Some of these are in consideration for 2025 and 2026. Municipal codes in Seattle, New York City, Honolulu, Knoxville, Tennessee, Jackson, Tennessee already allow for the single stair, I believe up to 6 stories. And so there have been, American cities that are taking a look at this and moving this forward. And part of the reason is some of the things that Senator Murphy mentioned around looking for creative ways to safely allow more housing without subsidies that deal with reducing some of the regulation that forces the types of buildings that we see right now. One of the complaints that we often hear in municipalities when it comes to multifamily buildings is the sort of big boxy structure. Part of that is the building code, is that what makes it in the fire code around having one long hallway with 2 exits. You're limited in the types of housing that you can build, especially when it comes to smaller lots, and especially when it comes to sort of the smaller multifamily buildings that are, more, think 5 to 15 units as opposed to 50 and 100. And so when we hear folks sort of complain a little bit about, oh, it's another one of those big, 5/1 boxes, that's because that's essentially what folks are allowed to build, and that's why they're building it. And so this is a conversation that I think is really well timed for our current housing shortage, and takes a creative look at ways to be able to do this. As has been mentioned, new multifamily buildings are among the safest out there with the advances in sprinklers and fire-resistant walls and fire-resistant doors. There's a lot of tools out there, and certainly defer to the fire marshal's office on those pieces. But things have changed since the last few decades, and it's time to take a creative look at updating our codes to reflect those changes. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We will now call Samuel. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Samuel Hooper. I'm Legislative Counsel with the Institute for Justice, a non-profit civil liberties law firm that works a lot in the area of property rights. I'm speaking in support of this bill. I think it's excellent, and it provides a good balance of maintaining public safety, which is obviously very important, but also enhancing property rights in a way that will help to hopefully alleviate the housing crisis. So I think, as a previous witness, Mr. Taylor from Housing Action New Hampshire mentioned, one of the main problems, particularly with infill development, where maybe you don't have room for an entire block necessarily to take up a large apartment building with a double-loaded corridor. You can, if you have a smaller block, build a smaller footprint apartment building which generally costs a lot less money. But a single corridor, often with, between one and just a couple of apartments per floor plate, becomes a lot more affordable to do that. You can then have the kind of in your more urban areas, you can have those kind of dense, walkable areas that are cheaper to then provide city infrastructure to, require less use of cars and traffic, and have all sorts of other positive knock-on effects in terms of urban life. So from an urbanism perspective as well, I think it's very good policy. We think that this Senate Bill 282 restores a good level of flexibility in that residential design while maintaining critical safety standards. And from the Institute for Justice's perspective as well, because we come at this from a property rights perspective too, we think it's good to just let the market provide the multiplicity of different kinds of housing to suit different people. Some people, very much like living in the larger apartment buildings that often have, various communal facilities and so on. The smaller apartment buildings can be very good as well. You might be able to tell from my accent, I don't originally hail from these parts. I grew up in London, where single-stair apartments are very common. And it does lower the cost of housing and just mean that more people are able to live more centrally, get to work necessarily without needing a car or other private transportation. So it just has a lot of knock-on benefits as well. So we think this bill strikes a very good balance between private property rights and maintaining safety. I commend Senator Murphy for this bill and the committee for considering it, and I'm very happy to take any questions that may arise.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
So, NHMA, Brody, you didn't sign up to speak, but you are opposing it. I would like you to come forward and tell me why, if you would.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you to the committee for calling me up. We were currently opposed to the bill due to the currently in fire code, some of the things that the fire marshal spoke to, where between in municipalities that permit greater dwellings that are greater than 4 levels, 4 stories, this would kind of water down some of those safety requirements for the 5th and 6th level, especially if they're don't have sprinkler systems. So our concern would be what you kind of mentioned about whether or not the municipalities have the capacity in their fire department to have ladder trucks that could deal with that. We also had some concerns with the 10,000 square footage for buildings that were less than 4 stories. That's a very large amount of square footage and would kind of water down the safety requirements. But to my understanding, I think the amendment addressed some of those things, maybe not all of them. So that's part of the reason why we're not testifying, is because we haven't seen the amended language.
I didn't mean to put you on a spot, but I wanted to know your reasoning,
It was same as the fire marshals. I mean, this is a safety thing, and when buildings are less safe and there's more of a chance for fire, and especially in larger buildings where the fire can spread, that's a large impact on municipalities and their fire departments, and it requires more investment in their fire departments and the type of equipment that they need to fight larger building fires. And so that's obviously a concern of ours, and we want to make sure that these buildings, when they're built, that they're safe. We've had some discussions too, actually, just out in the hallway about some cities around the country have now required that as these requirements are kind of loose, and that there's additional requirements for the types of materials these buildings are made out of, so they're flame retardant. And so that's something that we've heard will be explored in upcoming fire codes and building codes, and that would improve safety. So then as developers would like to see these kinds of codes kind of loose, and there's at least sprinkler system requirements and flame retardant building supply requirements, which would be important for preventing fires and preventing any kind of additional impact onto municipal fire departments.
Thank you. Senator Murphy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment corrects it from 10,000 square feet per floor to 4,000 square feet per floor, which was what was originally intended. Now, you said one thing I want to clarify. Do you know that the bill only applies to buildings that are sprinkled?
Yes.
So buildings that aren't sprinkled would not qualify for a single stair.
Understood, yes. And we do understand that. And we haven't seen the amendment yet, but we assume that'll become public and we'll review it. And we may change our position from opposed to neutral, depending on what it says after we review it internally. So that's part of, these things are constantly moving. So we kind of, with bills like this where we know there might be changes, we usually try to listen, learn, thank you, and understand what exact changes are being made and whether or not we'll continue opposition in, defending local control.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you for coming up. I appreciate it. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to Senate Bill 284? All right, seeing none? Oh, 82, thanks. Michael, I turn. We'll close the hearing. And let's see, what time is it? Oh, you take your time. We will now open the hearing on Senate Bill 284. Welcome again, Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Keith Murphy, representing people of District 16. Another tweak, another bill with another tweak. So as cars became part of every household in this country back in the 1940s and 50s, cities, not so much smaller towns, but cities began to imply parking requirements. The idea that every unit that was built had to have a certain number of parking spaces allocated in order to not have streets be overcrowded. And obviously, providing parking adds cost to the construction and provision of that unit or those units to the public. They add directly to the housing cost. And I think it's time that we take a look at technology and where we are as a society and make sure that this requirement still makes sense. It might very well still make sense in certain parts of the state, but in Manchester, where I live, I can tell you that I know a lot of people that do not own cars. They have Uber, they have Lyft, they live in downtown Manchester so they can walk to work, they walk to meet their friends. If they need a car, they can pull out their phone, they pay Uber $3 to go a few blocks away. So in that sort of environment, do these requirements still make sense? And I think the answer is no. Having said that, the bill is carefully tailored to place a restriction or a limit on how many spaces a municipality can require. It does not forbid all requirements. So I think it's a good step in the right direction. I did have printed out an article that was published from the Land Use Journal in 2020 about the importance of reduced parking requirements and its possible effects on housing prices. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? So is this a mandate to the towns, or are you just going to let it be if a town like Manchester it works, but maybe, a different town it doesn't, and say Nashua, I don't know. Shouldn't it be decided by each town what works best for them?
Madam Chair, the towns exist because we say they do. We give them the power to do whatever we choose as a legislature to allow them to do and not do. And in some cases, it's up to us to put restrictions on the powers that we allow them to exercise. The towns did not create the state legislature. The legislature created the towns. And I think it's important to recognize that. We step on local control every day in these buildings. And I don't think it makes any sense to pull out this myth of local control in certain circumstances and then vote to trample on it 800 times a day. And we do that. We do it all the time. And having a community that requires 5 parking spaces per unit or something doesn't make any sense. The bill still allows communities to have up to 1.5 spaces per unit for workforce housing or 1 parking space per unit for the rest. And I think that's enough. If you have a unit that, for every unit that has 2 bedrooms and therefore has 2 cars, you've got other units where no one has a car. I've got a restaurant in Manchester. I've got 20 employees. Almost none of them drive. And that's just sort of the evolution of where we're going as a society, I think, at this point, is very few people are driving in urban areas. So again, it still allows communities some flexibility, but it doesn't let them require 3 and 4 and 5 parking spaces per unit anymore. And I think that's a reasonable restriction.
I see your point for Manchester, but I just think that the town needs to know what their people need better than the state. I think towns, the people who live in their towns should be able to decide what's best for them.
So does that mean that you'll be voting against the Sanctuary Cities bill or the cell phone bill, the cell phone ban for schools? And the answer is clearly no. So I think we have fundamental disagreement. I respect your position, but I disagree. I mean, I think that it's up to the legislature to rein in towns when they abuse the powers that have been devolved to them. And this is a good common sense step towards doing that.
I don't have any further questions. Does anyone else? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm listening to this conversation and acknowledging what works in Farmington might not work in Manchester. And I'm recalling Montana's legislation this past year where they sought to do some really aggressive housing reforms. And in that case, they did the cities in Montana where they're all very small, cities with less than 10,000 people, certain laws wouldn't apply to them and it would apply. And the example you give works for downtown Concord also, that there's lots of people living there without cars. So would you consider possibly us putting a population cap on the size of the city or town that's doing it?
I would, but I don't think it's necessary. And let me clarify something here. We need to trust builders and developers to provide for their customers. They respond to market demand. They give customers what they want. Why are most kitchens white now, whereas 30 years ago they were brown? It's what customers want. And if you look at a community like Bedford, which you represent, Senator, people don't want to buy a house in those communities, in those rural areas, without parking. You don't need to mandate that Bedford or Farmington provides parking. They're going to build the house with parking. They're going to give people what they want and what the market demands. These are parking requirements. I don't think Bedford is likely to have a parking requirement. The towns you're concerned about, I don't think they have parking requirements. I believe it's only going to be the cities, the larger cities that have them, because those are the ones that have enough density where streets have been crowded in the past. And I can tell you, as someone who lives in Manchester, the streets are not nearly as crowded as they were 30 years ago. Does that hopefully answer your question? I'll take the amendment. I don't think it hurts. I don't think it helps. I don't think it's really necessary.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We will now call Nick Taylor.
Good morning, Madam Chair. This will be the last time I'm up here today. Nick Taylor, Director of Housing Action, New Hampshire. We are in support of the legislation. And when we're talking with our members and folks who are looking to build housing, the first thing in many cases they look at is the parking requirement, because that dictates exactly what they're going to be able to do here. It's not how many units could they build. It's not what they could fit. It's specifically looking at the parking. And that leads to, either expensive garages underneath that, maybe not necessary and drive up the cost of the rent, or it creates the seas of payment that folks do not like to see, and it's not a good use of land. But sort of more importantly, to the senator's point, when you start to pull back on parking requirements, it doesn't lead to no parking, it leads to right-size parking. And it leads to really the question of who should be making the decisions, and should it be the developer who knows what their market needs are, or should it be a government entity that's estimating, broadly speaking, across the entire town or across the entire district, what someone might need? And I think our position would be that this is a developer's decision and that they should be able to look at this and say, what will our rental tenants or users or someone who's going to purchase it need versus looking at a mandate across the board that says, oh, everyone must be having 2 cars, because that's just not necessarily the case. And so to some local examples here, so certainly downtown Manchester does not have parking requirements as it is, and there are parking that exists there. But it's not just the downtown Manchester. The town of Seabrook has no parking requirements townwide. And that's a more rural community in some areas. But it's a situation where you need a car, and there still is parking that exists because they're not going to build homes in Seabrook that don't have parking because you're going to need them. And so this is, again, sort of another effort where we're sort of pulling back on some of the overreaching regulation to allow for things to move forward. For your and the committee's awareness, there is a bill in the House Bill 382, that was proposed to do away with any parking requirement whatsoever. Looks like that is likely to be amended to 1 spot across the board. So it would actually go potentially a little bit further than this. One small note here on the drafting on line 8 talks about the maximum residential parking spaces. So the maximum would be the maximum that you could build as a developer. Very few communities have parking maximums. I think what we're looking at is the parking minimums that you would need to be approved going forward. This was came up in House Bill 1400 last year with the drafting, had the same issue. So happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Nick. We will now call Brody from New Hampshire Municipal Association.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to the committee. The New Hampshire Municipal Association is opposed to Senate Bill 284. I'll just begin. Senate Bill 284 would eliminate reasonable local control over planning requirements that ensure municipalities have adequate parking for residents, visitors, and the workforce. The bill creates potential planning and safety issues, including those regarding traffic management, community aesthetics, health and safety, and snow removal, which is very apt this time of year. Parking is an issue in many municipalities. Many municipalities are feeling an extreme burden to not having enough parking. And oftentimes this will require more law enforcement presence due to neighbor disputes over parking, which are common in denser zoning districts with limited parking. I'll also mention too that towns and cities, they know what's best to how to plan and zone their communities, and they need to have enough parking to allow people to frequent these denser zoned areas where businesses exist and need parking for their employees, and where people frequent those establishments. And by not requiring adequate parking in these areas, especially neighboring residential areas, if it's a commercial district, more people will compete for a finite number of parking spots in a community. There's only so much land where you can put parking and balance that with the need for residences and commercial areas. Residents and visitors, they often become frustrated, especially during the summer months, fall foliage, or ski season, when tourism peaks in our state. Intentionally creating a lack of parking with a one-size-fits-all approach will not improve communities. There are just 2 separate limitations on municipal parking authority that were passed last year, which we deem as making this bill kind of unnecessary. I also want to point out that RSA 674:16-A has on-site parking requirements and would allow, if an applicant can demonstrate that an alternative parking solution will meet the parking demand created by the proposed residential use, a planning board shall be required to approve the alternative parking solution proposed by the applicant as a substitute for the proposed residential use meeting on-site parking requirements. And so this already allows some flexibility for planning boards and for developers to figure out alternative solutions to the existing parking requirements that many municipalities have. Most dwelling units in New Hampshire, they require 1 to 2 parking spots. That's just the nature of the beast. People drive to work. We do not have good public transportation. Even in cities, as much as we want to pretend that we have robust public transportation, it's not that good. It's not adequate enough for most working people, especially people who would be who live in this state that need to be able to drive sometimes 20, 30, 40 minutes to work. Myself and my wife, we drive each an hour to work every day in different directions, so we can't carpool. So a 1 parking spot requirement in my community, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't make any sense. Municipalities and the property taxpayers, they shouldn't bear the burden of funding more public parking, which would become necessary if we couldn't require 1.5 spots per unit. And 1.5 isn't just kind of a made-up number. It's assuming that most dwellings have 1 to 2 adults, and that on average, they're going to need 1 to 2 cars. So you kind of cut the difference, 1.5. I'll also note too that if there is an undue burden because of parking requirements, developers can go through the process of getting a variance. That's not unreasonable. If the parking requirements are an undue burden, they can go to the zoning board and prove that there was an undue burden and that it doesn't impact the community in a negative way. Most zoning boards are pretty reasonable and understand that there's a need for housing in this state. Most municipalities understand that. All we're asking is for the existing systems to let them play out and let statutes that just went into law on July 1st, 2024, like 674:16-A, to see how those are going to work before we come with mandates from on high. Municipal association has long stood that prohibiting good local effective government is not the answer, and we should appreciate fewer limitations on local government. We do understand it's a Dillon rule state, but New Hampshire has a rich historic tradition of promoting local control and good and effective government and allowing municipalities and ultimately the voters to adopt ordinances that are best for their municipalities. And there are issues in many cities in municipalities throughout the state where developers aren't meeting the parking needs in municipalities, especially without these requirements. And so all we're asking is for developers to be good partners with planning boards and zoning boards and to just make sure that they abide by these very limited, reasonable requirements for parking. And with that, I'll yield to any questions, and I appreciate you guys taking my testimony this morning.
Senator Murphy?
Thank you. Can you tell me which communities have minimum parking requirements for residential development?
Every single one of them, off the top of my head, probably not.
Okay. Do you believe that follow up, Madam Chair?
Of course.
Do you believe the consumers want parking when they buy? You just talked about yourself. You're a resident. Would you really live there if they didn't have parking allocated?
Depends. Maybe I might. Yeah, and I might be pretty disgruntled. I don't have enough parking. I have to find an alternative solution. I think an important thing to remember is that consumers don't get to have a say with the site plan review or with the parking requirements when a developer creates a building. The developer can create the building and under these requirements make it so there's not adequate parking. And especially in this economy where consumers only have so many options where there's affordable units, they might decide that that's a sacrifice worth making where they don't have to be living in a congregate living situation. Instead, they want to live in their own dwelling unit and they might be willing to make that sacrifice. But we would like to prevent those types of sacrifices from being made. So I think it's an assumption that consumers are somehow involved in the development process, but they're not. Ultimately, what the developer creates and what they offer is what the consumer is going to get. And the consumer, especially in this economy, they're just going to have to settle with a unit that doesn't have adequate parking, which will have a negative impact on the municipality and its residents.
Madam Chair, I'm going to hold off because I'm going to engage in debate with the witness, and that I'm trying to do
He's
that.
not a witness, but
Thank you very much.
okay. Anybody else? Thank you very much for your.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on Senate Bill 284? Please come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Sam Hooper with the Institute for Justice. I wasn't planning to speak on this, but it occurred to me that while the committee is hearing this, it is a rather auspicious time to be looking at parking minimums. This month, there was a professor, I believe a UCL professor, Donald Shoup, who wrote a very famous book, The High Cost of Free Parking, who passed away. And he had a long legacy of just examining a lot of assumptions that are baked into so many zoning ordinances and so much of the thinking that goes on in planning in America about, how we provide for cars. One of the things that, he noted was the fact that, this has a long route going back to, I think, 1923. Columbus, Ohio was the first place that introduced a one parking unit per one parking space per apartment, and it kind of metastasizes from there. And what tends to happen if you don't let the market and developers who know best about what the demand for parking will be is that it kind of disfigures the urban landscape. I was in Louisville, Kentucky recently, and something like 45% of the entire downtown area is just surface parking, which has awful knock-on effects in terms of just eliminating walkability, urban blight, just pricing out and pushing out, different forms of housing, infill development, commercial places that just make places, urban places, places where people want to live. So developers, we do believe, know best when it comes to these things. And I'll note as well that a lot of the current assumptions about parking space come from something called the Parking Generation Manual, which is developed over time. I think it's currently on its 5th edition. What it is, though, it has a lot of assumptions about how many parking spaces you will need for every conceivable kind of land use. From, if you have a gym and it has the swimming pool has this many gallons, then you might need this many parking spaces. And it delves into that much detail. But unfortunately, it's also based largely on pseudoscience and a lot of assumptions about land use that just aren't accurate and have never been questioned. So I think this is a really good time to actually just stop, think again about, if we're going to impose these restrictions on property rights, if we're going to continue with policies that potentially disfigure the growth of our towns, and New Hampshire is a growing state, a lot of other good policies are in the works in the Senate and in the House to try and increase housing. But if we don't correct this very important element of minimum parking, then that growth can be disfigured. And then you do end up, unfortunately, with parking spaces where they shouldn't necessarily be. It's much better to let developers who know best about and let the market control for providing that level of parking that consumers actually need. So again, I wasn't planning to speak on this, but I just think it's an auspicious time because someone who's dedicated his life to this very question passed away this year. Donald Shoup from the University of UCLA, I believe it was, had a lot of good thoughts about parking. And again, I commend the committee for looking at this issue today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 284.
It's my work today.
Regent?
That's okay. 20 minutes.
Senator Abart in here?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't see him. Can't count on my eyes. Okay, we will now open the hearing on Senate Bill 165. Senator Abart.
Beautiful day in the neighborhood. Beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Good morning, Senator. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. And hello, committee members. Good to see you all. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Abart. I'm the prime sponsor of SB 165, and it's really a simple bill. Basically, it increases the threshold for annual audit or review of Consumer Cooperative Association's books. Supporting this bill, am I too loud? Little reverb. You guys turn down the reverb on this? I'm kidding. Teasing. Supporting SB 165 basically reduces the unnecessary audit burdens for ROCs, residentially owned communities, basically provide one of the most affordable home ownerships opportunities in New Hampshire. With 151 ROC across the state, 151 of them, these communities allow residents to own their own homes at a lower cost than renting an apartment or similar size. ROCs operate without state government subsidies, making them crucial and part of our affordable housing in New Hampshire. So addressing the burden of costly audits requirements this bill basically addresses. Current audit thresholds impose unnecessary financial and logistical burdens on ROCs. A full audit can cost up to $10,000, directly increasing the lot rents in for individual homeowners. It is often difficult to find accountants willing to conduct audits for organizations with revenues at existing $250,000 threshold. So SB 165 aligns ROCs with nonprofits. SB 165 raises revenue threshold for required audits from $250,000 to $2 million, bringing it ROCs in line with nonprofit audit standards. This change ensures that small ROCs are not forced to conduct costly audits that do not improve their financial transparency nor accountability. This simple bill basically maintains transparency. For instance, for organizations of 1 million in revenue and under, at least 3 elected associate members will conduct an internal financial audit and report back to the full association. If there is between $1 and $2 million in revenue, the ROC will have the option to conduct a formal financial review instead of a full audit, maintaining transparency while reducing cost. A financial revenue is done by an outside accounting firm at roughly half the cost of a traditional audit. So above $2 million, a full audit remains required, ensuring the appropriate financial oversight for larger organizations and puts ROC in line with nonprofits. In closing, basically, it's a balanced approach to strengthen ROCs. SB 165 protects affordability for ROC homeowners by eliminating unnecessary financial burdens. It preserves transparency and accountability by maintaining oversight and mechanism appropriate for the size of the association. And the bill removes barriers to sustaining and expanding residential ownership of manufactured homes in communities in New Hampshire. By supporting SB 165, legislators can help ensure ROC continues to thrive as an affordable, self-sustaining housing option for New Hampshire families. And as you can see, it's very self-explanatory. It's basically a one-pager. And I'm open up to questions.
Thank you, Senator Abard. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful, blessed day.
You too.
Thank you.
So we will now call Abby Bronson from the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name's Abby Bronson. Again, for the record, I'm a born and raised Granite Stater, and I currently live in Manchester Ward 3. I'm also the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is in strong support of SB 165, and we want to thank Senator Abard for bringing this bill forward. As a background of what we do, we are a nonprofit lender that provides loans to individuals and organizations who are unable to secure financing from traditional banks. Primarily, those loans are going to the resident-owned communities that you just heard of from Senator Abard. When we work with a resident-owned community, we help them to purchase their parks cooperatively and become owners of the land underneath their home. As Senator Abard mentioned, there's currently 151 of those communities across New Hampshire, and that has secured affordable home ownership for more than 9,000 Granite State families. We are in support of SB 165, a bill which would update the state's audit requirements for consumer cooperatives in alignment with the current audit threshold for nonprofits. This will cut burdensome and costly red tape for resident-owned communities, in turn supporting affordable home ownership. So before you should have a one-pager that outlines the current challenges faced by ROCs because of the audit requirement and how SB 165 will address that. So instead of repeating what's there, I'll give you an example of where this bill could help. So as I testified before this committee last week, the cost of purchasing a manufactured housing park has gone up significantly. Right now, the average resident-owned community in New Hampshire is somewhere around 60 homes. So when this audit requirement was put into law 35 years ago, we'd only expect resident-owned communities above that average to have to conduct these kind of financial audits. And because of their size, because we're looking at larger communities, the cost was better distributed among the households, and as a result, had less of a bearing on the rent of each individual community member. Now, however, much smaller parks are subject to this audit requirement. We recently worked with a community of just 33 homes, which now has to conduct the annual audit requirement. So to do some quick math, if we assume a $10,000 audit cost. A community of that size could be looking at a $300 per home annual cost just to conduct the audit, and that's on top of every other increase in costs that we see. So in the current housing market, any increase in costs like this should be looked at extremely closely. In the case of Rocks, especially the smallest communities, an audit simply is an unnecessary burden. These communities would be better served by a formal financial review, which we find runs about half the cost of an audit and provides similar safeguards. So manufactured housing, as you'll hear me repeat as often as given the opportunity to, is one of the few affordable homeownership options left for our state's family. So I urge you to support SB 165 to make it easier for Rocks to do what they're in the business of doing, keeping this unique homeownership option as affordable as possible. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Yes, Senator, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bronson, for coming and bringing your expertise and taking my question. When was the last time we had adjusted any of these audit requirements?
35 years ago.
Okay, that's what I thought I would do.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will now call Daniel. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning. My name is Dan Hotchkiss. I'm currently the Chief Financial Officer for Hodges Development Corporation. We've been in business since 1969, but have been managing resident-owned communities since around 1996. And we work very closely with the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. Thank you very much for having me. As I noted, we've been in business since 1969 and managing resident-owned communities since 1996. And certainly at a time when affordable housing is at the forefront of our public discussion and a critical factor in keeping people housed, it seems that unfortunately the resident-owned communities are often overlooked in terms of what they provide for as affordable housing. They are a key component of the affordable housing community and are unique in that they offer affordable home ownership opportunities to many New Hampshire families. Unfortunately, these communities have also been dealing with infrastructure needs that were often deferred by the previous owners. And the repair and replacement of their water, sewer, and infrastructure and roadways are vital resources that must be improved. Annually, as part of our process and service to the boards, we provide a draft budget based on the anticipated expenses and any planned improvements. There are many areas in which the communities have little control over their costs, such as utilities, real estate taxes, city water, and sewer. We often have to propose a lot rent increase, which will negatively impact the owners of these homes and their personal budgets. These rent increases for the cooperatives help cover their escalating costs. However, the resulting increase in these revenues may place the cooperative over the current revenue threshold as outlined in RSA 301A30 and may now require them to have an audit in accordance with the RSA. And as you've heard, audit fees can range anywhere from $8,500 to $10,000 annually, adding yet another cost to these communities. These audit costs, in conjunction with other escalating costs that the cooperative has little control over, often result in monthly lot fee increases of $30 or more, sometimes even raising up to $100, depending on the budget. This level of lot fee increases certainly places a significant burden on the families in these low-income communities. The board often must balance the needs of the membership, many of whom are on fixed incomes, with that of their current escalating costs and much-needed improvements. The current standard requires an audit, as you heard, if revenues exceed $250,000. To put that in perspective, $250,000 of gross revenues is the equivalent of a resident-owned community with 60 homes currently paying $347.25 a month in lot rent. Assuming an estimated annual audit cost of $9,500 when the ROC reaches that threshold, and assuming that they had already been required to have a review, which is about half that cost, so $5,000, That would increase their total annual cost by $4,500, which would be equivalent to about a $6.25 monthly increase just for audit costs to the residents. Also equivalent to a $75 increase annually. But that increase only factors in the audit cost. It doesn't consider any other costs that they must consider in their budgets, real estate taxes, water, sewer, insurance, et cetera. We certainly are in support of this increased audit threshold because it will help these communities move forward and spend the money where they really truly need it. As you heard, these standards have not been changed in over 35 years, since 1990. And certainly goods and service costs have increased significantly over that period. So we are in support of this particular legislation, and I am happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, committee. Appreciate it.
The chair will call Kim. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Chair. Now it is. My name is Kim Capon. I am resident of Medville Cooperative, 55 and older community in Goffstown, New Hampshire. I've been a longtime advocate for resident-owned communities at the state and national level in various capacities. For the record, this includes a former board member of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. Today, however, I am representing New Hampshire Homeowners and Tenants Association, MOTA, in support of House Bill 165, Senate Bill 165, sorry. Since 1972, MOTA has been the united voice of manufactured housing residents in investor-owned and resident-owned communities alike. We are dedicated to ensuring our members' rights and interests are protected and effectively represented, including at the State House. As you all know, New Hampshire is facing an affordable housing crisis, as is much of the rest of the country. Manufactured housing provides a unique solution as one of the last affordable homeownership options. This affordable housing is naturally occurring, meaning it exists without the help of government subsidy. To preserve this unicorn or unique housing, the legislature should work to make it as easy as possible for them to thrive. Senate Bill 165 would do just that. It would make it easier for our resident-owned community members to run their communities by alleviating the financial and logistical burden posed by the current audit threshold. Resident-owned communities like mine and other MOTA members are run by the residents like a business. However, instead of seeking to maximize profits, our goal is to keep our cost as low as possible so that the monthly lot rent can remain affordable. Any increases in that cost of doing business directly impacts lot rent, including the cost of conducting an audit. At the same time, financial accountability is important, and this bill preserves alternative examination methods. Specifically, all communities above $1 million to revenue would still be required to utilize the services of a certified professional accountant. For communities with revenues $1 million to $2 million, this bill would still require a formal financial review. This formal review typically is much more cost-effective, helping to keep lot rents low and repurpose the money saved for other essential communities. For these reasons, MOTA supports the Senate Bill 165. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for having me.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to this bill? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing. And we will open the hearing for Senate Bill 167.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Tara Reardon. I am the Senator for District 15, Concord, Hopkinton, and Bow. If you've read the bill before you, you can see it's almost duplicate of the one that we just heard. I was the director of the ROC program at the New Hampshire Community Loan Funds for the last 10 years of my career before I retired, and just want to emphasize this is one of New Hampshire's smartest and best affordable housing solutions. They operate cooperatives as not-for-profits, and the profit margins are very, very thin. 75% of the folks that live in the manufactured housing parks that work with the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund are at or below, are low or moderate income folks. And they're surveyed every time there's a new grant application or anything like that, pretty reliable statistics. For them to be paying $10,000 for an audit year after year only puts more stress on the individual budgets of each of those homeowners. I am so glad that Senator Abard brought this bill forward. The original bill, we won't need to keep this unless we keep it as a vehicle for something, because it has a $20 a month or $30 a month in a very low income person's budget is a game changer for them. So it's time to update this statute. All of these groups, 151 cooperatives, are all successful and run by volunteers. There's no excess in these communities at all when it comes to the budgets, and this will be a game changer for not only the cooperatives themselves but the individuals that live in the homes there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
No one was signed up to speak, but does anyone from the public want to speak on Senate Bill 167? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on 167. Yes, and we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 166.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. You've heard the intro of resident-owned communities already in the last bill, how they operate, what they are. There lots of them, and the majority of them are lucky enough to have a Hodges that does do their books and their finances for them. Lots of them have professional property management. But I brought this bill at the request of the New Hampshire Realtors Association. These cooperatives are, as I said, volunteer-run and have a board meeting once a month. But when a home is being sold in that community, sometimes it's and all of the homes are individually owned by the homeowners there. Sometimes it's very hard for the realtor that's doing that listing to get the background information on the cooperative, what their budget is, what the balance is in their reserve accounts, if they have any planned projects coming, anything like that coming up. And I will say the majority of cooperatives are very helpful in getting that information, but again, they're volunteer run. Some of them are very small, 10 or 12 homes in the community. And so without it being a mandate required by law, lots of them don't take the time to put a package together or promptly respond to a realtor who's trying to bring a new homeowner into their community. So by putting it in the statute in 205A, where all of the other requirements of the cooperatives live now, it makes sense that it will make the life of those trying to sell homes in that community a lot easier.
Are there any questions? I have one. I just wondered why you have it just a resident-owned community as opposed to any.
So the two choices in the state of New Hampshire are an investor-owned community and a resident-owned community. An investor is usually a single entity or a single person that runs the business of running a manufactured housing park, and there's generally not a problem calling the owner of an investor-owned community and getting all of the information that you may want about what the lot rent is or the history of the lot rent. That investor owner is probably not going to share information about reserves, planned projects, things like that with someone who is just buying a home in that community. In the case of a resident-owned community, you're a member of that cooperative and you're part of that business of running the community. In an investor-owned community, it's a single business person or entity that has probably financial information that they're not interested in sharing with a prospective unit owner.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We will now hear from Sarah Holland. Hello, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sarah Holland. I am a licensed real estate professional and a realtor in Central New Hampshire, and I'm also the 2025 Public Policy Chair for the New Hampshire Association of Realtors. The Realtors ask for your support on Senate Bill 166, and we want to thank Senator Reardon for bringing this legislation forward. The language in the bill is almost exactly the same as existing language in the Condominium Act relative to resale by purchaser. The language in the condo statute has existed since 2005, and it's worked quite well. The intent of SB 166 is to ensure that any prospective owners in that resident-owned community have access to relevant financial information about the rock prior to purchase. Just like purchasing a condo, someone's buying into a property. At a rock, they're buying into an association. So they're becoming part owner of that association. So in conducting their due diligence, it's critical that they understand the financial situation of the community association and have a reasonable opportunity to assess the strength and viability of the park that they're buying into. So, and just like in the condo statute, a potential owner would have to be provided with a statement of any capital expenditures, major maintenance costs, if any are anticipated within the succeeding 2 years, and they would need to be provided with a statement on the status and number of reserves, a copy of the income and balance statement for the last fiscal year and any pending suits or judgments, as well as a statement on insurance coverage, the declaration, bylaws, and rules, the monthly annual fees, as well as special assessments made within the past 3 years. All of these items are currently mandated by statute to be provided to condo buyers, so we're simply asking for that to be extended to rocks as well. It's important to note that many, if not most rocks currently do provide this information voluntarily as they're able to. They understand that the purchaser is going to become a member of their community and should feel comfortable with the financial strength of that resident-owned community. However, there are some communities which do not provide this info or make receiving financial data statements challenging. So SB 166 provides important and valuable consumer protection by providing critical info about the community, which a buyer would have to have, which would not have a realistic opportunity to know unless provided by that association. So we thank you for your, we're hoping for your support on SB 166, and thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We will now welcome Lynn Merrill.
I'm Lynn Merrill. I'm a grower in Kingston, New Hampshire. We've been working there since 1955. With the housing shortage and dramatically increasing home sale prices, manufactured homes have become one of the most affordable alternative housing choices for lower income buyers, particularly those on a fixed income. Resident-owned communities provide an opportunity for manufactured homeowners to have some control over their community. In my experience, and I've had a good deal of it with one park in particular, this has brought pride of ownership to the communities, resulting in common land improvements and more control of their finances. Last spring, one of my most experienced agents represented a buyer for a home in a resident-owned community. After the property went under agreement, the agent asked the listing agent for a copy of the financial statements, minutes of the last resident membership meeting, and minutes of the last board meeting. The reason she asked in particular was because the streets and the roads in this particular community were in severe disrepair. And she wanted to know whether or not there was a plan in place to repair them, and if so, how much was that going to cost? The buyer, and then when she was unable to receive this, the resident-owned community absolutely refused to give the information, refused. So the buyer agent went and asked for the information, and they refused as well. She said only members who are currently members of this community, of this particular rock, have access to this information. You should get it from the seller. Well, they couldn't get it from the seller. The seller was selling because she had recently been placed into a dementia unit in an assisted living community. So the documents were completely unavailable. These documents are, by law, available to any buyer of a condominium. A resident-owned community and a condominium association have some similarities, Buyers of both types of housing need these documents to determine if they have the resources to not only purchase the unit, but also to be able to live there. And many, if not most, mortgage companies also require this document review. Everyone wants a home purchase to be successful. ROCs want to know the buyer can afford to pay the monthly fees. Mortgage companies want to be assured the buyer will not default. This legislation will treat all buyers, those of condominiums and ROCs, equally and fairly. I want to thank the New Hampshire Association of Realtors for listening to this issue and working with the Senate and Senator Reardon to draft the legislation, and I urge you to vote to pass on Senate Bill 166. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to Senate Bill 166? Seeing none, the hearing will be closed on 166. And a couple of announcements I mentioned earlier. We will be having an executive session on March 4th. And on Senate Bills 165, 166, 167, 170, 173, 282, and 284. They will be referred to Senator Murphy's Subcommittee on Housing. And with that, I'd like to take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Have a good day, everyone.